So let's talk about how one single military strike could, potentially, detonate the entire global financial system. Now, this isn't some kind of movie plot. It's a very real scenario that all kicks off with a tiny, 21-mile strip of water and the fragile economic deal that, well, keeps our world running.
What is this number? 21%. Well, that's the share of the world's daily oil supply that has to squeeze through one single, incredibly vulnerable choke point. Think about that. That's a fifth of the lifeblood of the entire global economy, all passing through one tiny gap on the map.
And that leads to the big question, right? The one that keeps policymakers and markets up at night. What if it just stopped? Because a disruption here isn't just about an energy crisis. As we're about to see, it's the trigger for a much, much bigger financial meltdown.
Okay, so first things first. Let's get specific. Where exactly are we talking about, and what's the kind of spark that could light this fuse and set off the whole chain reaction?
Here it is, the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, it's just 21 miles wide. And through that little channel sails the energy that powers entire nations. We're talking Japan, Germany, India, China. The sheer volume is just staggering.
The scenario that gets the ball rolling begins with a very specific type of attack on Iran. Not just military targets, but civilian infrastructure, power grids, bridges, things like that. An attack like this would be seen as an attack on the Iranian people themselves.
And Iran's response? Oh, it would be immediate, and it would hit on multiple fronts. They wouldn't just close the strait. No, they'd activate their entire network of proxies across the region, probably hitting major economic centers in the Gulf. And here's the crucial part. They would frame the whole conflict as a broader war against the Muslim world, which would put America's own allies in a totally impossible situation.
Now, this military mess puts a very specific and incredibly powerful financial system right in the crosshairs. It's a system that has, very quietly, propped up American economic power for about 50 years.
And that system is called the petrodollar system. So after the big oil shock in 1973, the U.S. cut a deal mostly with Saudi Arabia. The bargain was pretty simple. You guys price all your oil only in dollars, and in return, we, the U.S., will provide a military security umbrella for you.
The way this works is it's brilliantly simple. Every country needs oil. And since oil is only sold in U.S. dollars, every country needs U.S. dollars to buy it. This creates this constant, artificial global demand for American currency. It also means they need a place to park those dollars, so they buy U.S. government debt, Treasury bonds, just to have access.
The result of all this is what one French finance minister famously called America's exorbitant privilege. It's what allows the U.S. to run these massive deficits, funding its government with debt that the rest of the world basically has to buy. But that privilege, it only lasts as long as the original deal holds up.
So what happens if that protection fails? If Iran actually strikes Riyadh after a U.S. attack? Well, then the Gulf nations face a choice that could literally change the world. And history kind of gives us some clues about how this could all play out. I mean, we've seen energy used as a weapon before. The 73 embargo, the 79 revolution in Iran, both caused huge recessions and economic pain in the West. And look at what happened recently with the sanctions on Russia. It didn't make their economy collapse, it just pushed them, and big buyers like China and India, to speed up trading outside of the dollar system. It was kind of a preview of what's to come.
But here's the real kicker. The U.S. is way more vulnerable to a shock like this than it was back in 1973. Back then, the national debt was tiny, and the dollar had zero real competition. Today, U.S. debt is just astronomical, and you have credible alternatives, like the Chinese yuan, that are already up and running.
Which brings us to the dilemma for the Gulf states. In our scenario, the American security promise is broken. So, what's the smart play? Keep relying on that broken promise, or start hedging your bets, pivot toward other powers like China, and speed up the move away from being so dependent on the U.S. dollar?
And this is so important to understand. A crisis in the Strait wouldn't be starting a new trend. It would be like pouring gasoline on a fire that's already burning. Saudi Arabia is already taking Chinese yuan for some of its oil. The shift has begun. A conflict would just turn a slow walk into an all-out sprint for the exits.
Okay, so all of this geopolitical chess playing eventually leads to some really severe consequences for the U.S. economy. This is the part of the story where the crisis truly comes home to roost.
It all starts with a crisis of confidence. You see, being the world's reserve currency is really just a confidence game. Once major countries start to think it's smarter to move away from the dollar, that process can become a self-reinforcing death spiral. And that spiral hits the U.S. Treasury market first and hardest. If countries don't need dollars for oil anymore,
They don't need to hold trillions in U.S. debt. They stop buying it. Maybe they even start selling what they have. That would mean U.S. interest rates would have to skyrocket to find anyone to lend, and the cost of everything America imports would just explode.
And that's the core of the problem right there. On one hand, you've got the U.S. government with this massive growing need to borrow more and more money. And on the other hand, the pool of foreign lenders willing to give in that money is shrinking fast. It's a fiscal collision course.
So, with nobody else left to buy the debt, the buyer of last resort becomes the Federal Reserve itself. The Fed would be forced to just print new money to finance government spending. It's a process called debt monetization.
This leads to a really brutal conclusion. It is a total lose-lose scenario for the U.S. Defaulting on your debt? Catastrophic. But having your central bank literally print money to pay your bills? That's a textbook path to hyperinflation. Neither of those choices ends well.
So, after the dust settles from this whole economic detonation, what does the world even look like? What kind of new order crawls out of the wreckage?
Well, the end result is the rapid arrival of a multipolar world, not just in military terms, but financially. You'd see an era where the dollar is still important, sure, but it's no longer the unchallenged king. It would have to compete with the yuan, maybe a basket of other currencies, effectively ending that exorbitant privilege the U.S. has enjoyed since 1974.
And really, that's the final thought here. A single, tactical decision in a 21-mile-wide strait could set off a strategic financial chain reaction with consequences that could reshape the entire global balance of power for generations to come.